The problem is you do see a lot of antisocial people succeed. Loneliness is as big a risk factor for ill health and death.
We live inside our heads.
You go cold turkey, you go into withdrawal.
There is a lot of value in the stuff that we struggle with.
Better Thinking, conversations with experts exploring all things psychology. Welcome back to Better Thinking. My name is Nesh Nikolic, and today I have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Lisa Williams, a social psychologist whose research explores how emotions shape and are shaped by our social world. Lisa's work focuses on the adaptive functions of positive social emotions, such as pride and gratitude, diving deep into how these emotions influence us across different levels, from the intrapersonal to our relationships and even at a group level. Her research highlights how these feelings aren't just pleasant experiences, they also serve powerful roles in motivating behavior, strengthening social bonds, and navigating group dynamics. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with Lisa. She's so well informed, and it was just interesting to hear about all of her research and the different outcomes. And so I'm really excited to share our conversation with you. So let's just jump straight in. Lisa, firstly, let me say a big thank you for coming onto the show. I'm excited to talk about positive emotions, the function of positive emotions, particularly gratitude and pride. I know that these are topics that you've researched extensively, and it's an important topic to discuss because I think positivity, I have a bias in that space. I'm quite optimistic. I think there's great value, and it's good to discuss it. So, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Let's get started how I usually get started, which is, how did you get into this space? What brought you to wanting to research, be a researcher, and in particular, this area?
Yeah, I kind of accidentally fell into psychology and social psychology research. I set out my university career thinking I was going to be an environmental lawyer and save the world. And I got into my first biology class and absolutely hated it and thought, I can't do 4 years of this. I definitely don't want to do this for a career. So the environmental science stuff dropped off as a professional training, and I happened to be taking psychology as an elective and was invited in to do some volunteer researching with the professors who had set up a lab, and kind of caught the bug, and I was sold. And pretty soon I was in my supervisor's office saying, how do I do this as a career? Like I want to design experiments. I want to collect data. I want to ask questions about the nature of social interaction and how people think and behave around other people. Like, this is just, I didn't even know this was a thing. And now I know it's a thing and I want to do it. And so from there, my path was pretty filled with a lot of good fortune. So I started a PhD with a fantastic researcher in Boston, Dave DeSteno, and we created the initial work I did on pride, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in detail. And then I landed this job down here in Sydney, Australia in 2009, and history is set. So kind of an accidental social psychologist, but one that's just still really passionate about trying to answer questions to advance our knowledge about the way we feel and behave around other people, and how our emotions kind of positively grease the wheel of our social interactions.
It looks like we both caught that bug. I know that the social psychology was certainly, I think, probably my intro as well. And I recall trying to put forward so many social psychology questions for my thesis and just getting rejected. I know you're doing this thing called a clinical master's, not social psychology. I'm like, yes, but this is relevant.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny. A lot of psychology likes to have these cordon sections between this is what social psychology does, and this is what clinical psychology does, and this is what developmental psychology does. But actually, you can ask the same types of questions in whatever domain. And where we're getting to as a broader field is the value is in integration, right? So can we ask some social psych questions with a clinical slant? Or can we ask the same question for kids and adults? And what do we get if we do that? That's the dream, is to break down those silos. Anyway.
Tell me about your journey. Where did that sort of lead to, you know,
Yeah, so I really kind of stumbled into the research on pride again. So Dave DeSteno is known for work on social emotions. When I arrived in the lab, he had been doing work on gratitude and jealousy, and a few other positive emotions. In my undergraduate years, I was a rower. I did crew, and I remember, he's like, Lisa, just reflect on your personal life experience and develop questions that you're curious about that reflect your own experience, a bit of a me search rather than research guide there. And I thought, what's really interesting about rowing is that it's not a very redeeming sport in a lot of ways. It's really grueling. You're up at terrible hours. The races are short and chaotic and painful. What is it that might drive people to participate? And of course, the beautiful mornings and the dawn views are nice, but I had a hunch that maybe there was something emotional there, that there is some sort of sense of accomplishment that you get from achieving past that grueling nature. And in discussing this a lot and looking at the available literature, what we realized is that there was this big gap, that a lot of people talk about pride as an emotion, both in everyday life, but also in the literature. But no one had really asked whether maybe that positive sense of accomplishment, the pride in having done something difficult, having gotten through a hurdle, having put in the hard yards and achieving something, maybe that's what actually keeps pushing you forward. So we set out to test that, and we designed some fun experiments, inducing pride in participants in the lab, and then measuring how hard they work at a difficult task. And it turned out the hunch was correct, that pride, this kind of unique positive emotion that we sense, that we get after accomplishment, kind of keeps that wheel spinning, that effort wheel spinning. So we feel pride, and then we reflect, and given the opportunity to work harder, we do. And in in our studies, we showed that it's not the same as just feeling good. It's not the same as just kind of having high self-esteem in yourself. There's other work that highlights that pride can have a downside, and that's certainly true. But we didn't find it in our studies in the way we set them up. Um, so that was really kind of some nice findings, really pushing the envelope of what we know about that emotion, and starting to shine that flashlight on another positive emotion that really has value for us.
Before we jump into that, tell me about the research method. I
Sure.
always like to hear about how it's put together. How do we induce pride?
Yeah, so we had to design something from scratch because no one had done it before, and we designed a task that so social psychologists like to lie to their participants a lot to achieve what we do. So this is all a bit of a ruse that we put our
Damn you,
participants
ethics.
through. Yeah. We were approved. We had our ethics approval, but we basically had the participants in the pride condition do a task that they thought was important. We told them it was a visual acuity task, that they should work hard on it. And then the participants in that condition, I, as the researcher, gave them really positive feedback on that. I said, "Oh, your score actually placed you in the 94th percentile. That means you've done better than most everyone who's done it so far. Great job." And I delivered that about 1,000 times, so I'm pretty good at that feedback. And then
That
we
almost
we
sounded like an infomercial just then.
there you go. That was my researcher voice. Um, so that was live in person with the participant there. And then we said, okay, your next task is this mental rotation task. And we designed it so it was similar enough to the tasks that they believe they have now performed really well on, but not identical. And sneakily, we made it so that there were thousands upon thousands of trials of the task. There's no way they could finish it. At some point, they had to decide to stop. And we said, okay, well, here's your next task. Work on it as long as you like. And then we just left the room and measured how long they spent. And so that was the setup for participants in the pride condition. In the control condition, we had them do that performance task, but didn't give them any feedback, and then let them do the potentially forever task. And then in a series of experiments, we compared that to other things like just making them feel good, looking at pictures of puppies and pleasant things, or a self-esteem boost. So simply saying, without the positive feedback, simply saying, oh, your score placed you in the 94th percentile. To kind of rule out, is it this emotional sense of pride and accomplishment, or just knowing that you performed well? So we had this set up and we measured. So I'd go back to the control room and wait until they decided to stop, which sometimes was extremely long. So some people spent 45 minutes doing this visual rotation task on the computer. Bless them. And it turns out that when we averaged the data together, it was the participants who had the pride induction who spent longer on that mental rotation task. And we interpreted this as support for the idea that it was that emotional sense of pride that we had given them through the feedback that helped them push forward the kind of boring, effortful nature of this mental rotation task. And we didn't see the same pattern for people who had looked at pictures of puppies and rainbows, and we didn't see the same pattern for people who simply received their score, which let them know they did well, but maybe without that social push of the feedback.
Wow, the great controls. That's really clever. That's clever.
Yeah. So what's kind of important when you're studying positive emotions, and in particular when you're studying specific positive emotions like pride or gratitude or compassion or any other one you want to pull out of that hat, is you need to show that the effect is unique to that emotion or that it's shared with other emotions. So we do, in this type of research, jump through a lot of hoops to try and distinguish the effect or show where it might be shared with another emotion. And sometimes it's unique and sometimes it's shared, and that's okay. It's not that every one emotion has to have its one thing that is never shared with another one. But in particular, pride is kind of important in that sense. I'm not aware of other positive emotions that have this strong effort-based kick. And partly that's because pride is really unique to achievement, to having put in effort and done well. So I think that makes sense logically.
Wow, wow. I mean, it does speak to maybe how important acknowledgement and people receiving awards, particularly in front of those that are important to them. Whether it's their peers most often, but also their loved ones. Being able to kind of demonstrate, hey, I've achieved something, let's say in my workspace, but I've got my spouse, I've got my kids, I've got my parents. It's almost like graduating from university.
That's right.
Such an incredible moment for
So
most.
I've actually done research on graduation settings, if you'd like to hear about it.
Please.
So the work that I'm talking about is really, this is a slight tangent, but it will come back. The work we've talked about so far is about pride in your own achievement, but particularly parents and loved ones can feel proud of other people. And we academically call this vicarious pride. So vicariously sensing pride on behalf of someone else's achievement. And so a PhD student, Joel Davies, and I designed a suite of studies to see if vicarious pride is a thing, and then what happens when people feel it, and what happens when people express it was kind of the follow-up research that we did over some years. And so one of the studies, we actually recruited parents and loved ones from a graduation setting on campus and asked them, how proud are you of your graduate? And a suite of questions around what you now do about that. And what we found is that the parents who were more proud of their parents and carers and loved ones who were more proud of the graduate indicated that they were motivated to support that person in their pursuit. So let's say that graduate is going on to pursue a career, they were more inclined to support that career. They themselves were more inspired to work hard. So kind of that analog of that original mental rotation task,
Yeah.
perseverance, we see that being proud of someone else also prompts you to work hard. And also this, maybe not surprisingly, this kind of social bonding effect. So the more vicariously proud these graduation attendees were of the graduate, the more they wanted to affiliate or spend time with the graduate. So we see that vicarious pride has this really interesting suite of positive outcomes. And then we thought, that's great, but one would like to think that these parents and carers and loved ones are telling the graduate that they're proud of them, right? So some of the value of emotion is in expressing it. So we did a series of studies getting people to express vicarious pride, write a letter to someone that you're proud of, and deliver that letter. This was not a physical letter, an email. And we tested those same outcomes. And it turns out, whether it's expressing or receiving vicarious pride, that it has this suite of beneficial outcomes. So going back to the graduation setting, if the parent says, look, I'm so proud of you. I know you worked really hard for this degree. I'm just really chuffed by your accomplishment here. The graduate is then more motivated to pursue their own goals, and they feel closer to the person who expressed that to them. So we see this kind of building positive effect, this tornado, if you will, of kind of positive outcomes, which is to me really interesting. It's a less studied area of these emotions that we can feel on behalf of other people. When I talk about this research, people seem to be more comfortable with the idea of vicarious pride than pride in themselves. We socially, I think, are told that maybe we should suppress our pride. Maybe we shouldn't express when we're feeling proud of our own accomplishments. Maybe, their pride is one of the sins of most of the main world religions, like don't be arrogant, don't overpraise yourself. But then when I say, but look, there are also positive effects of vicarious pride, people go, oh, yes, good. Okay, so I can get on board with that one. Yeah, pride is okay as long as it's for other people. And I guess I say, yes, it is good if it's for other people, but it's also okay to feel proud of your own accomplishments. Like it's an important part of our mental toolbox that keeps us going. And if we avoid feeling pride, you can kind of predict where that would go. Maybe we won't work as hard at the goals of things that we're good at because we've suppressed this emotion that is kind of designed to keep us going.
And the extension to vicarious pride is actually offering the gift of expressing how proud you are of that
That's right.
person, that then actually, repeats that effect, or at least, reinforces that. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's super fun research. I love uncovering these little pockets of our social behavior. I think those of us who are parents hear a lot about maybe don't praise your children too much. And as a pride researcher, I kind of feel a little bit fraught on that because we do need to teach our kids that pride is an emotion that they can feel in their own accomplishments. And I guess how you do that is important. Very much praising effort and not simply being excellent at everything has its place. But
Yeah.
I, without restraint, tell my kids that I'm very proud of them and they should be proud of themselves if they've worked hard at something.
Let me bring in the skeptics. The skeptic, and I'm not sure if there's any research around this, would argue potentially, let's not give all kids a ribbon for playing on, the basketball team.
Sure.
Because you're going out and just saying simply for being there you get a prize, you get
Mm.
rewarded. Does the research say that viewpoint is not solid, that children who are given an award acknowledgement, that pride means that they're more likely to continue playing basketball, for example, and obviously putting in training and so on? What does the research say? Have we looked at that? Do you know of it?
I don't know of any developmental work on kind of what you might call a participation award.
Yep.
Um, I I am aware of work that shows that kids' understanding of pride is pretty well in place by the time they get to maybe 7, 8, or 9 years old.
Okay.
They understand that accomplishment in an area that is socially valued leads to this emotion that most kids understand that we call pride. And they start to show the types of behavioral outcomes you would expect based on what we see in adults. So they tend to work harder at things. I don't know of work on the give everybody praise. My own research has always, at least, of course, we're lying to our participants, so that's a little bit tricky, but they believe that they've done well because they worked hard at something. They're skilled at it, but they did have to put in some effort. So it's not just you showed up today, here you go. So I do think hearkening back to kind of the broad parenting and teacher research saying don't just praise everybody for everything, like praise where effort led to a positive outcome, and that will keep the effort going. I think that holds.
Yeah.
Whether you call that praise or pride induction is
Sure.
probably a semantic
Look, I think
thing.
if I were to run a hypothesis, not that I can actually go and test it, but it seems to me that that would make a lot of sense. The idea of don't praise everything is very, very different to saying you can still praise participation because there was still effort there. You went to training,
Exactly. So what
you
I was going to
attended,
say
you
is
tried to score, you blocked, you passed, you chased, you still contributed significantly.
that's right.
There will still most
If you go
probably
back
be
to
a
rowing,
player of the
all
match. Sorry.
yeah, like all the people in the boat or all the members on the basketball team did make effort. If even if it was just to show up, for some people, that was a massive effort. And to keep that effort going, it would make sense to give them a sense of pride in that. But I mean, I'm American if my accent isn't clear. And Americans are known for that participation award, right? Everybody gets a trophy. And I think that that comes from a sense of not wanting people to feel left out. So I very much research positive emotions, but I am interested in things like loneliness and social isolation. And I do think that there is a risk when you maybe shower some people with praise and leave others out of that, that there is a social isolation that could undermine the whole effort as well. So it's probably a bit of trying to stay within the boundaries, right? Not overpraising, but not doing it in such a selective way that you're actually introducing a sense of isolation.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I think obviously it would need to be studied, but it does make sense to me in terms of where there's effort, you can still go out and praise that. We don't necessarily want to do, if we think about Skinner's work, you don't go out and praise everything every time because it loses value.
Yeah.
So therefore, you have to go out and say there's a player of the match, so to speak. Not everyone gets player of the match.
Right.
And a good coach will make sure it goes around slowly. The top performing don't just get it week after week after
That's
week,
right.
as you might actually do in a professional setting. That's a different sort of world. But in terms of praising children, invoking pride is really important. But not necessarily, oh, you got to training today. Well done. I'm so proud of you.
Right. Like here's a
But it
sticker.
might be valuable for a child that's anxious and it's really, really hard for them to get to training. That would be appropriate. But yeah, that all makes sense. That all makes sense. Gratitude. Do we go there now?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Because there are some really nice parallels in the work that I've done and the broader literature on gratitude. By way of definition, often researchers on gratitude talk about it when we're talking about a specific emotion that's felt in a particular context. We're talking about the emotion that you feel when someone has basically helped you out, right? Given you some sort of time or resource or lent something to you, and that sense of gratitude that you've received a benefit from someone else that they gave to you to help you out. And that's a little bit different than this broader, maybe life sense of appreciation for the things you have. So the kind of narrow social psych work on the gratitude we feel in a moment, we're talking about that, a case of maybe potential reciprocity. You've received something.
And you're the
Now
receiver.
what?
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And there's been many years of research showing that gratitude helps us kind of, if we think about that effort wheel we were talking about with pride, when you've received help, the person who helped you is in kind of a vulnerable situation, right? They've given something, maybe their time or money or a resource that they could have kept to themselves. They've given it to you. And as a society, what we need is that there is some form of reciprocation there to keep the helping wheel going, right? You can't just take. And
I'll just jump in. I
yeah,
didn't quite, is the giver in this space the one that is vulnerable, but they're
yes,
still giving?
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So let's take a case where, you know, I see you at the cafe, you're buying your coffee, you don't have your phone, you pull out your change, you're a few bucks short, and I step in and I pay for your coffee,
Mhm.
right? So one option, of course, is you could just go on your day and not do anything about it. Uh, or maybe you seek a way to repay that in a sense. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to help me out later on in the day with something else, or maybe even help someone else out. The premise is that it's gratitude, the emotion that we feel upon receiving that help, that pushes us to reciprocate or find a way to pay it forward if that's the option.
Sure.
And a lot of studies, a lot of experiments have been designed to test this idea. Some rather fun social psych setup similar to the Pride one, where I, with colleagues and other researchers and other bits of research, really pinned down this effect. Like when we feel grateful, we really do tend to try to repay it. And I think that work is really important because it highlights yet another emotion that's within our repertoire that pushes us, right? So with pride, it's pushing us towards effort and accomplishment. In the case of gratitude, it's that emotion that's pushing us to invest in those relationships, to reciprocate, to repay. Expression of gratitude is a really interesting one, especially when we start thinking about kids and coworkers and other people. So if I've given you those few dollars to help make up your coffee deficit, you hopefully would feel gratitude. And then you have a choice of whether to say thank you or express it maybe more deeply. We don't always express our gratitude, even when we feel it. But the newest research, and I've done some work in this area, is that saying thank you really is essential to kind of reap the full benefits of this emotion. So you've received those couple dollars. If you say thank you to me, now my view of you is I helped you, and now I know that you recognize that I helped you and that you're going to repay me. Like I trust you more. We're in now a good relationship. Whereas if I gave you the couple bucks and you walked away, I'm thinking, who's that guy? I'm not going to help him again next time. And maybe I won't even help anyone next time. Like this feels a bit awkward. So this feeling of gratitude and the expression of gratitude appear to be a real cornerstone to keeping the type of helping pro-social behavior that we all would like to think that we do for other people. It keeps that in place. It's kind of maybe the social glue that helps us keep that going. So I think often socially we're nudged, say thank you, say thank you, say thank you. It can become a bit of a behavioral tick, and that's not really ideal, right? You want that expression of gratitude, saying thank you, to be genuine, to be coming from a place of gratitude, not just saying the words. But even saying thank you, maybe without even assuming that it's driven by gratitude, it has pretty robust effects. it's kind of exciting work
Is there
on that front.
that's more of the expression of gratitude, a deeper expression, amplifies the effect,
Yeah,
but the effect is already quite strong.
that's right. That's right. That's
Is
right.
there anything that says how much amplification, or, and look, we don't have to be hard science, but
Yeah.
roughly, is it like a 20% amplification? Is it?
Oh, I'm not sure I could pin a number on it. Um,
Do you have a
uh,
gist? Do you have a sense, a feel?
Look,
And this isn't scientific. This is scientific.
yeah, so not non-scientific guess here is that if you say, "Oh, thanks," and it comes off as a bit dismissive, not really embedded in this situation, I'm getting the sense that you're just saying that because you feel like you have to. The benefits of that are going to be very limited.
Yes.
Whereas if you say, "Oh, look, thanks so much. You know, I realize how big of a deal that is for you to give me a couple bucks. I just thank you so much."
Hmm.
Um, Expressing that in a way that's responsive, that's the fancy word for it we talk in the literature, is responsive to the situation, really will build that social relationship. So I think if you interrogate that just from a common logic
Yeah.
perspective,
Yeah.
the knee-jerk thanks isn't going to get you very far. It it may help,
Hmm.
it may be better than saying nothing, but it's not going to reap those positive benefits.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine the positive benefits would be received differently for both the receiver and the giver. Uh,
Mm,
in there's a loop to all of this. So
yes.
so so the one that's the giver that says, hey, I've noticed you're a bit short on your coffee.
Mm,
It's $3. The receiver going, oh, that's so thoughtful and kind. I really do appreciate it. And it doesn't have to be over the top. It's just going to be
yeah.
genuine.
Yeah.
It's more about the genuineness of the words rather than the volume of words.
Exactly.
um, and then the receiver, from the, I suppose, from the gratitude back,
Yeah. The
gets the
person who
same.
originally
Yeah,
helped,
yeah, it
yeah,
kind of.
is now going, "Oh, I recognize my help was received, was appreciated, and therefore I'm more likely to help you at the cafe next time, or someone
Or
else,
somebody
or
else.
someone else." So, I guess there are two broader ideas that are worth pulling in here. I'm not alone in thinking of this kind of I said tornado earlier, but this kind of spiraling up of positive outcomes is an idea put forward by Barb Fredrickson, a very prominent psychologist. And she developed this idea in the 90s for positive emotions more broadly. She called it the broaden and build hypothesis. And the idea is that positive emotions, unlike negative emotions that really hone in our attention on a problem at hand, positive emotions, because generally they're felt in situations where things are safe and things are going well, they broaden our attention to potential opportunities and they build resources. So they build social resources or they build the skill-based resources that we see out of Pride. And this theory has received a lot of support, kind of, and she calls this in some of her work upward spirals of effects of positive emotion. So, a positive emotion is felt, it has benefit for the person who experiences it. Maybe that person expresses that emotion, and then it has positive effects on the people that saw or heard that expression. And we do get this ballooning effect of positivity. Um, that this is starting to sound like that positive emotions have no limitations. They certainly do, but we do have a lot of evidence that they're really important for building skills, building social relationships, building well-being, and the maybe the historical context here is that maybe a slant towards clinical psychology where pathology of emotion really is on the negative side. So, depression, anxiety, felt in too high intensity, felt in the wrong context, starts to disrupt well-being and bring you into a place of ill-being. That has been a classic focus within the field for a long time. And largely since the 90s, we're now 30 years on to kind of saying, hey, that's important to understand, but we have this other end of the spectrum where positive emotions are felt, and it's not just about dragging us out of the negative, that in their own right, positive feelings help us in a way that is kind of crucial to navigating social relationships or getting good at things that we didn't understand before we started uncovering that, picking up those rocks and going, what about pride? What about gratitude?
Are there conditions that are more likely to help pride and gratitude germinate? So I asked this in a question of people who are living in, for example, developing countries are much less likely to be environmentally considerate, thoughtful, mindful, because they've got other conditions that they're dealing with.
Sure.
And in a country like Australia, we have a culture which says, "Hey, pick up your litter." If you go have a picnic, you take your litter back with you. In countries where that's so far away from what's important, because you're at the cusp of putting food on the table, etc. It's just not something that's open to you. And obviously the condition around that is an economic condition, scarcity,
Sure.
the condition, and so on. Are there conditions that bolster the likelihood of someone being proud, showing gratitude, expressing gratitude, expressing pride?
Yeah.
Are these those things that we do like in schools, or that we're trying to do? How can that be bolstered? What are the conditions we want to potentially be mindful of?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I'm not aware on pride and gratitude specifically. I'm not aware of things around scarcity or resource constraints. I'll touch base on kind of clinical limitations around gratitude that I'm aware of in a second. Uh, The maybe the naive optimist in me says that, no matter your life circumstances, there's likely something that could be a source of pride, or likely a sense of gratitude. But I definitely take the point that when it seems like life pressures to survive, to get by, to support your family, that kind of positive emotions and focusing and leaning into that is probably not going to be the forefront. I am aware of research in the clinical realm on the limitations of gratitude. So if you look at general populations, people who are more grateful tend to report feeling more satisfied with their lives, higher sense of well-being, they have better social relationships, they're sick less often. It's like anywhere you look, gratitude appears to be a good thing. But there are individuals who really struggle to come up with reasons to feel grateful. And particularly, limitations of gratitude have been documented amongst people living with major depressive disorder, who kind of I say this all research as I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I'm characterizing the summary of it. People who are struggling with being able to generate positive emotions, uh, really struggle with tasks that are designed to make them feel more grateful. And research suggests that if you go into or you try and intervene on someone who is struggling with depression and say, hey, at the end of each day, try and think of 3 things you're grateful for. Maybe they can do that on day 1. maybe the numbers start dwindling over time. And then that exercise actually starts to exacerbate the sense that you have nothing to be grateful for, which is exactly the opposite sense of the task, right? That's really not where you want to go. So we have to be a little bit careful about taking the findings out of maybe a social psychology or what might be cast as positive psychology more generally, and just shipping them into clinical populations. I imagine, going back to your question, there might be a parallel thing where taking understanding from research done on fairly well-to-do populations in developed countries and shipping them into developing countries may need to be done with care. Um, I think fundamentally, what I believe is that our psychological systems are equipped to experience positive emotions and reap those benefits, but there may be baseline needs that need to be met before we can lean into that. So you need to come to your day with a sense of safety and security before you can maybe engage
Mm.
deeply with a sense of positive emotion about your effort or positive emotion upon receipt of receiving something.
Lisa, I think you're spot on, and I can't say this factually in that I haven't gone out and read the research nor the methodology of the research, but I have heard the research quoted about, for example, affirmations.
Mm,
And I know that when people are trying to be grateful, sometimes it can feel like they're trying to affirm the good ththings
mm.
or what they're grateful for, and that's different, obviously, than receiving gratitude,
Yep.
which you did discuss differently there. But the understanding and hence why clinically practice acceptance and commitment therapy is
Mm,
there's an understanding uh, within the research that if you're feeling good, if you're feeling positive, and if life's going kind of well, affirmations, from my understanding, make people feel even better.
mm.
However, if you are below that experience of feeling good, what tends to happen is every time you try and affirm, so you say, oh, I'm really happy that, I've got running water, all that garbage sort of stuff. The mind can go out and recognize, there's an impulse to go out and push back on all the other things that are being missed in that affirmation. So when you go out and say, well, life's good because of X, the mind immediately goes back and says, yes, but I'll never meet another girl like so and so, and my life's kind of ruined because, she was the one for me.
Mm,
And then you go, yeah, but
mm,
there's plenty of other fish in the sea, and it just spurs on the
mm,
direct opposite,
mm.
which is no different to if I go to a belief system to anyone and I go against their belief system, they will lock in. They put their heels in and they go against mine. And so you get into an argument or a debate. And I think this is where that mental debate starts going on.
Yep.
Uh, so I think it's correct what you said, or at least it aligns with what I've understood as well, which is very, very, very different to being the receiver of
Mm,
someone's kindness, and then
yep.
feeling grateful for that, expressing that back. The person feels grateful for,
Yep.
or even proud of their action of giving. But yeah, you're right. There probably are conditions,
Yep.
but we need to be considerate about the context, because the context of trying to practice gratitude is nuanced.
Yes, it is. It is. And it's easy to be kind of sparked by the amount of research that supports the positive role of
Yeah.
gratitude, but you can't be swayed such that you think there aren't boundaries there of the benefits. And look, we see the same thing for almost any emotion. There's a bit of a debate in the literature on the nature of pride and whether there is such a thing as good pride or bad pride. to use very everyday terms there. I have my own views on that. But there are folks that believe that, there is a bad form of pride, and there are limitations on the benefits of pride.
Can
Yeah,
Lisa, sorry to jump in. Can you
yeah,
tell me about the prides?
sure.
Your views, because I want to definitely hear
Yeah,
your perspective on it, and what are the arguments that
yeah,
are had? So the for and the against, and so on,
sure.
to pull that apart.
So if you go quite a ways back in the literature, there were some theoretical points made about what might be called alpha pride and beta pride. And I don't know why they use fancy words. Why can't we just be talking about good pride and bad pride here? But this idea was kind of nurtured and reintroduced right around when I was doing my PhD, by an excellent researcher, Jessica Tracy. And she argues, her view is that, maybe using new labels here. So for her, she talks about authentic pride and hubristic pride. Authentic pride would be the type of pride that you feel that's based on a specific accomplishment, whereas hubristic pride might reflect a more overblown sense of arrogance that you're an amazing person. And she argues that you can measure these separately, that you can induce them separately. And when you measure what happens downstream, it's authentic pride that has a lot of the benefits, similar to what I've shown in my own experimental work. But if it's hubristic pride, it has all sorts of negative outcomes. So people don't necessarily work harder, they aren't liked by others, kind of what you might expect if you were studying arrogance. So she argues that there are these two forms of pride. She has some work on the idea that these are expressed differently. So if we're feeling authentic pride, we express that differently than if we're feeling hubristic pride. So there's that idea in the literature. It has had weight for a while, and the newest kind of version of this is the authentic hubristic debate. I personally don't see them as two types of pride. I think it's all pride.
Mhm.
And that the type of pride that I set out to research in those early studies is pride that is vested in a specific moment that's tied to effort, much like any other emotion, right? That we feel an emotion in a situation because something happened. So those studies are studying pride maybe in its home domain. But you can experience any emotion in too high of an intensity based on the context, or maybe you could also experience an emotion that is outside of the context in which it should be felt. So to make that more specific, instead of feeling proud of an achievement because at a game because you've shot the winning goal, maybe you feel pride, in all situations because you just think you're the most amazing thing ever. Like without the effort, without the context, you're feeling pride all the time. Or maybe you're feeling really intense pride based on a kind of negligible achievement.
Mm.
I would not call that a different emotion. I just think it's an overblown case of the same emotion. So it's a bit of an academic debate, but I do think it holds weight because if you're of the view that there are two emotions, then you can just lean into authentic pride and off you go and avoid hubristic pride. But I think that the outcome of that is not really sitting with the idea that our emotions are felt in a context and the functions, the outcomes of those emotions that are good for us are probably specific to that context. And of course, if you feel any emotion outside of that, then you start to get maybe pathological outcomes or negative outcomes. So let's take the case of anxiety. A little bit of anxiety does some good, right? So maybe ahead of a podcast recording, you're feeling a little anxious. I need to focus my efforts here. This is performance based, that it focuses us. But if we're feeling anxiety all the time, outside of a context in which it makes sense to, or we're feeling overblown intensity of anxiety, maybe ahead of going on the podcast, you're so anxious you have to cancel it, then that's not functional. So my view is that any emotion can get overblown and it doesn't become a different emotion. So I personally don't really believe in this A, B, two types of pride, alpha, beta, or hubristic, authentic, whatever labels you want to put on it. That it's one emotion, whether you're talking about pride or anxiety or sadness or um, positive emotion generally, right? We have a term called mania, which is positive emotion felt in too much extreme outside of the context in which you should feel good. So to
Yeah.
me, it makes sense that pride has that version, but it's just like any emotion. It's not special.
I can see both arguments and see the value for both arguments in that, or perspectives, not really arguments, my apologies, where it's kind of helpful to have language to try and describe functionality and
Mm,
to try and describe uh, and research different experiences. And so I can appreciate, alpha, beta, effectively good, bad, authentic, hubristic. We kind of put them against each other, but I tend to lean more with yourself, and the reason why, and not taking anything away from the other position, but I think there just needs to be more conversation around the nuance, and the reason why I say that is it almost goes back to that whole concept of, do you give every child a ribbon?
mm,
And that could be functionally really helpful because it tells kids they're part of a team and they've put in effort and they're acknowledged for that effort. But if we do not attach it to effort, and so we go the extreme
mm,
pride and recognition on very low effort, you might actually start to increase this possibility of, hubristic pride, arrogance, potential narcissism if you're repeating it
yep,
thousands of times when someone's young,
yep,
just telling the child that they're brilliant and
yep,
awesome, even though they're average, um, uh, and nothing wrong with either anywhere, but we're overblowing the experience. And I think it needs to be contextual as well, because narcissism also has a great function for some roles where you have to think that you're awesome
yep,
and you're amazing, you're brilliant to do your job, and that serves the earth really, really well. We need some narcissistic, for example, pioneers, leaders,
mm, mm,
um, just crazy people to go out and push the limits. This is how
mm,
advancements
mm.
potentially can happen. It's one version of advancements. There's many ways to do advances, but we shouldn't be labeling good or bad for pride. I
Yeah.
think that functional contextualism is important. Hence why I lean with you. Having said that, maybe the alpha beta can still be considered, but there's an ultimate filtering function which goes out and says what is the value of this. And so
Yeah.
sometimes there's great value in telling someone they've done an amazing job.
Yep.
Overblow it, trying to get a kid out of bed to get to school. You might need to blow it out of proportion occasionally, to get the ball rolling so that we don't have school refusal and school avoidance to
Sure.
start with. But that being a long-term approach just is probably not so functional.
Mm, mm. I did want to offer some perspective on slight, maybe we'll throw another emotion into the mix.
Please.
I guess we've we've talked about pride and gratitude a lot. I've done some work on compassion, and this is kind of an increasing area of focus in my lab, as another part of what you might call a positive emotional repertoire. Compassion is an interesting one, partly because it's prompted by the classic definition is prompted by the suffering of others. So you witness someone in need of help and you feel compassion towards them. And part of what drives you to help them is this emotional sense of compassion. Um, there's an interesting little nugget of research that resonates with my spidey sense that compassion is not like other positive emotions because it doesn't necessarily feel good. Like a lot of us shy away a little bit from experiencing or from situations that are really evocative of compassion. That research points to there being a bit of sadness or distress that's associated with these types of situations, but that it's compassion and it's not leaning into that sadness or distress, that it's actually compassion is what bridges us over to help. So you might take a natural disaster situation. We feel a lot of distress when we see people are suffering from that situation. But to the degree that we feel compassion, we're motivated to help. And that's really a powerful way to look at it. The Dave DeSteno and some other researchers, going back to your scarcity question, highlighted this really interesting effect where some people think, okay, well, to feel compassion, you have to come from a place of resources, like you have to have something to give to feel compassion for other people. And what that research shows, my understanding of what those studies show is that even people who come from a background of scarcity or adversity have this capacity for compassion, and it's actually sometimes those people that behave the most compassionately. So there is a resource component, but maybe the mindset of not having had, of living with scarcity or experiencing adversity actually puts you in a mindset that inclines you towards compassionate responding rather than distress or sadness. And the people who help are maybe ironically those who are maybe least suited, right? Like they're less set up to help. And I find that really fascinating because it turns the narrative on its head about, who should help is the folks who are inclined to help, who are feeling this emotional resonance to push them, are those maybe who've experienced adversity and can understand that. And how do we harness that, even though they may not have the resources to help in a given moment, if it's a money or a time thing.
Yeah. And maybe the way in which they help differs because of the difference of
Sure.
resources.
Sure.
And maybe the compassion is moderated by being closer to a source of either the capacity to have compassion because the rest of your life allows you to, or you feel it because you've kind of felt it in the past many a time as well. That there's I mean, I know uh, if I reflect on my own experience, the way that I do compassion has changed over the years, and it's been very different depending on the different naiveness that I've held, or the experience that I've held myself, and it's constantly changing. But it's different now as an adult than it was as a young adult. A middle-aged adult rather than a young adult. But I can't really reflect as compassion as a child because I don't recall that vividly. But I watch my children be incredibly compassionate.
Yeah.
They do it all the time in the playground, at least in the small little bits when I'm picking them up or something. They are incredibly thoughtful, as many of the kids are. The vast majority, they see someone fall, hurt themselves, they respond. It is incredible.
Yeah. Well, you're doing something right. So well done on raising compassionate kids.
I don't know. I don't think it's me. I don't think it's me, but
I do a lot of work on pro-social behavior more generally, kind of within that gratitude context. But I have a stream of research on blood donation as this kind of interesting example of behavior that is designed to help other people. Blood donation has its eccentricities, right? You're literally giving something of yourself to someone else, and you don't know who that recipient is. And there are all sorts of fascinating theoretical questions, but just pragmatically, it's a kind of interesting little pocket of pro-social behavior. I have a student right now working on how compassion might push people to donate blood and when and how that happens. Really focusing on the emotions that we might feel if we're considering the potential recipients of that donation. Could we harness that emotion to drive blood donation? It seems kind of obvious, but as far as we can tell, no one has actually put that to an empirical test. So you'll have to stay tuned. We're designing those studies right now. I have a feeling we're right, but I
What
don't want to get arrogant about it.
can you talk me through the design?
Oh, sure. So the current plan is to, um, I guess to fully explain it, there's another emotion that we're pulling in. So bear with me.
Sure.
I'll take you on a journey. So if we think about blood donation, we could think about potential recipients of a transfusion, the people who we're donating to. We can also think about other donors and the emotion, the positive emotion that we might feel thinking about how other people also donate blood is what researchers call moral elevation, this sense of being elevated by the moral acts of others. So we think about maybe classically Mother Teresa, right? We're inspired to also behave pro-socially. So the fancy term that researchers decided to use for that, because we don't have an everyday word for that, is moral elevation. So this project led by my student Dewa is looking at how these two emotions, thinking about a potential recipient, the compassion towards them, and or thinking about other donors and the elevation that we feel thinking about that, the fact that other people give, maybe both of those help drive us to donate. So the current plan for the research is to start to disentangle that. Can we lead participants to think about potential recipients and see what their naturally arising levels of compassion are and measure how that tracks on to their intention to donate blood? Likewise, can we get people to think about other donors and measure their elevation at thinking about other donors and see if that tracks on to their intention to donate? And if this pans out, where this leads to is doing research that can inform how blood collection agencies, like here in Australia, Lifeblood, can kind of conduct their marketing, so to speak, right? How do we best inspire people to donate blood? Well, maybe it's trying to elicit compassion, or maybe it's trying to elicit elevation. I think my personal sense is that I think a lot of people that design these types of marketing campaigns that we see every day on Facebook and on the bus, right? Donate today. They have a sense that these emotions might be powerful, but we don't yet have the scientific data to really push that. So that project is kind of at the forefront of that.
And it's incredibly important, because if you're going to be putting advertising dollars towards an outcome, you want to know, is the moral elevation higher? Do we need to create more identity for the donors? Do we need to go out and make them part of a group that are,
That's right.
giving group? How do we reinforce that? How do we make them champions?
Yep.
How do we go out and acknowledge them with I don't know, a letter in the mail or something,
Sure.
a certificate or something? Who knows? Well, I mean, it's endless as to how you might try and elevate that, but you need to know that it works. Otherwise,
Exactly.
you're throwing, 80% of your budget at the thing that's probably, potentially the other side. But if you can know
That's right.
it's 60-40, 70-30, whatever it is, at least you're working with a model rather than blind. And if you're blind, you're kind of going 50-50 or
Sure. Or ignoring one or the other, right?
Yeah, you're just making it up. And that's such important way, and not only important in that, the potential of generalizing that to many other things.
Exactly.
is
So we're starting from a place of blood donation, which I kind of stumbled into research on that. Turns out blood donation research is a huge field, but they basically did emotions really poorly for a long time. And so I've tried to bring some more careful scrutiny about the emotions that donors feel with a focus on positive emotions. But there are a lot of similarities between blood donation and other types of helping, whether that's donating time or money, and the way that we might try to motivate people to do that, right? So yes, blood donation does involve literally going up and giving a part of yourself, but maybe the way that compassion or elevation or pride in having done that pushes you to do it is not actually unique to blood donation. And that's kind of the next generation in that project, is to say, okay, what do we know about blood donation? Let's check that out to volunteering
Yeah.
or giving resources in times of
And,
need.
and giving blood, I think, is an absolutely excellent platform to be thinking about, because there is friction in giving blood. So there's effort. It already creates effort. It's the effort of scheduling it, the effort of getting out there. And yeah, we might go and say, geez, that's so incredibly minor. It is, but we also open up a bag of chips because there's less effort in eating that than actually making a healthy meal.
Sure.
We are so primed to the littlest amount of effort. So there is a considerable amount of energy, effort, resources that goes into what appears to be nothing. Oh, you're giving blood, and your blood just kind of restores itself. It's like, no.
But so many of us don't. Yeah.
You're carving out time, you're changing your schedule, you're putting that amongst all your other responsibilities and demands.
And getting over aversion to needles. I mean,
Needles,
there are all
pain.
sorts of things. So so Lifeblood has this statistic. 1 in 3 Australians will need a transfusion at some point in their lives, but only 1 in 30 donate. And so it presents this like fascinating public good problem, right? We're all kind of living our lives banking on the fact that maybe someday if we need a transfusion, the blood will be there to do it. But generally, we're not contributing to that public good. And that's really, I came to this going, well, that is a fascinating problem to try and solve. I'm not alone by any means, I'm not alone in trying to do that. But layering on an emotional lens there, how can we harness positive emotions to get people to come and come again? So the real value in blood donation is having regular donors.
I've got a marketing plan.
Sure, let's hear it.
We're parking that big blood donor bus in front of the emergency center, or no, on the exit of the hospital. And we're going to have on one side all the people who have given who have done so, and we're going to give them big labels and how they're champions and they're amazing. We're celebrating them. On the other side, all the recipients, right?
There you go.
Which are their loved ones that they've just visited, and they're walking
inspired to help.
Boom, right? But I can see that the push and also the immediacy and trying to remove the friction. If you can remove the friction, I mean, this is why those buses. I mean, I work in the city, and they park a bus, near the Canberra Centre, which is the major shopping district area. Because you need thoroughfare, you need to remove friction, but so important, and 1 in 30 give.
Yeah, that's the statistic. There are of course a lot of reasons why in any given moment someone might need to wait a while to donate. So things like recent illness, or there are a variety of reasons. But I mean, I think as a broad brush statistic, that's just interesting to think about. And if most of us sat with that and thought about how, if we were diagnosed with cancer or we're in a medical accident and received a transfusion, how much we're just kind of assuming that that's going to be there, would push us to donate. It turns out that it's not so simple. If it were as simple as just presenting the statistic, that's all we would have. We'd have the donation centers aflood with donors.
It would be interesting to also know how many people have started being a donor after a loved one,
yes,
or themselves, where that's compassion toward a loved one, or even compassion to other people who might have been in the same position as the person who's been injured. I imagine there might be a factor in there,
Yes.
but whether it's true, I'm just kind of
Yeah, no, you're spot on. So a lot of research has gone into motivators and barriers to donation, and a lot of donors cite a personal reason. So a loved one who has needed transfusions, or understanding in a very lived way why donations are important is a huge push. And just like you said a moment ago, the biggest barriers are kind of just to making it a habit. So the time, the commute, the booking in, is are sizable barriers for a lot of people. And of course, collection agencies around the world do the most they can to remove those barriers. So it's for me, it's what can we do at a psychological level, to help push that. And if it's drawing on that personal relevance, right? The resonance that we have to the need for donation, how do we harness that to get people to donate again and again? And maybe it's emotional over time. Or maybe it's somewhere else. That's fine. I do leave room for emotions to not always play a role, but my hunch is they often do.
Look, I think where the beauty of social psychology is of course emotions play a role in everything. They're either going out, and from an ACT perspective, one of the things that I predominantly work with is this thing called avoidance, right?
Yeah.
And what's avoidance about? It's usually about a feeling, right? It's a
Yeah.
sensation. I don't want to have this feeling, so I'm trying to push it away.
Mm.
And when we think about it, whether it's conscious sensation, conscious feeling that I'm avoiding, or unconscious, which most of it is, they are in major play. We
Yeah.
use our feelings as this evidence barometer, poor one, but we still use it,
Yeah.
and we follow the evidence, which is our feelings,
Yeah.
and
I
that's
think
what makes us
I think
human.
we are never really without an emotional state. Like I can't think of a researcher that would say that we're ever in a true neutral, that we're always in some state of activation or positivity or negativity, that it is this kind of constantly shifting barometer of where we are. Likewise, we're never truly alone. So this is one of my favorite ideas to talk about out of social psychology. We tend to study when people are physically with others, and then the internet happened, and we realized that, of course, you can be with other people digitally, and but you can also be thinking about other people. So social presence of others can be just brought about in our own mind, or we can think about the next time we're interacting with people. And I would be bold and say there are extremely few times that we aren't thinking with a social lens. Your maybe typical human is really thinking through a social lens, a social presence, whether that's actual or implied socialness, is always informing what we do, and therefore always shaping the emotions that we feel.
Yeah.
Right? Our anxiety about a situation is often to do with the social nature of it. Performance matters because it's performance that's judged by other people. Our accomplishments matter because other people might view them and praise us for them. So really the social nature of our being is so fundamental that we would be hard pressed to come up with a situation where there's no social lens whatsoever.
It
We're
is.
always with other people, whether we want to be or not.
Yeah, I think that lens absolutely covers everything. Spot on.
Mm,
It's this is why something like solitary confinement is so painful when you specifically remove any physical contact, and
mm,
your brain will struggle to maintain that social connection for an extended period of time under those
yep.
conditions. So it just starts making all sorts of interesting things up, and
Yeah, so the
it's
movie the movie
hallucination.
Castaway, I don't know if you saw it, Tom
I
Hanks
have
and
seen
Castaway
cut. Yeah,
movie. Yep.
it's a great movie. I watched. There's a boxing movie where a boxer is unjustly prosecuted for a murder.
Mm,
I can't remember what it was called. Um, I was very young at the time, and I
Uh,
thought to myself, because I've seen so many of these solitary confinement scenarios where
yeah.
I actually put myself into solitary confinement for a few days, blacked out all the windows and everything at my parents' home. I had no idea at the time that you can, have a psychotic episode
Yeah.
from that. And I did it
Yeah.
to the extreme because I kind of enjoy that sort of stuff to test it. Just did no research beforehand. Um, and it was so unpleasant.
Mm,
It was so incredibly unpleasant. And I
yeah.
look back at it now and watch what the mind did and my emotions,
Mm.
where they went throughout, which is kind of silly because I was doing nothing for 3 days. That's it. Like
Well, I mean,
so like
that's
so
that's
what?
the
But
power of our social mind, right? Is that you deny that connection, you deny. And so in the movie Castaway, for example, right, the character makes a person out of a
yeah,
volleyball,
yeah.
Wilson. And that's
Wilson.
such a powerful thing, right? We see socialness in everything because we have most of us have this drive to connect with other people. And I guess to that to that, there is a whole layer of emotions that we feel around other people, like pride and gratitude, compassion. We could go to the negative side too, jealousy, envy. We have this whole suite of emotions that are kind of uniquely social. If you remove the socialness, you're kind of cutting off access to this suite of emotions that are acutely social.
Yeah.
And maybe the pain of social isolation, loneliness, or in extreme solitary confinement is from cutting off that part of our emotional universe.
Also, how we will give names to inanimate objects like cars,
Mm,
and we'll uh, deeply be fond of on a computer that you've spent years with, and you don't want to
yeah.
give it up or what until it starts failing. But this is in so many ways how I've read a couple of books in particular, I think incredible books around it's called Finding the Mother Tree and The
Mm,
Hidden Life of Trees, I think it's called. And through both of them, it kind of almost takes the lens of explaining how trees and the environment are so much like humans. And so
mm,
there's this kind of compassion that you'd have for your fellow human, and you start developing this kind of compassion towards trees, are these living,
yeah.
you know, breathing, communicating organisms. And that's kind of what I am as well. And so there's this kind of beautiful story that they tell. And I think when we give names to things, even if it's yeah, it was a basketball with Wilson, was it?
Yeah. I think of volleyball, but
Or
yeah.
volleyball, my
Yeah.
apologies.
That's
Could have
okay.
been a coconut. It doesn't actually
Yeah,
matter.
it doesn't matter.
Anything round and you put a couple of eyes and a
Yeah.
mouth on it,
Yeah.
that was sufficient to have a relationship
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
And there's something so vitally important. I'm a big tech lover, and I
Mm,
cannot wait for robots to fill the gap of social isolation, whether it's for older persons in homes,
hmm
um, where you can, we're going to need the aesthetics to happen. So we're going to need Hollywood to put all the aesthetics that looks like you and I. And
hmm
I've actually seen that in Poland. They have like I don't know, a technology center where you go. It's kind of enjoyable. You see all this stuff, but one of them was a face that's clearly rubber made out of,
Yeah.
but they put eyelashes and it
Yeah. Yeah.
looks real. It just doesn't like speak very well. You can see it's a robotic speak, but it uses like chat GPT, so you can ask
Mm,
questions. But
mm,
when you look at that and you go, what's going to happen in 50 years when robots can actually fluidly walk and you give them a proper face? I'm going to want one of them in my nursing home that I'm going to buddy up with, and we're going to
yeah.
be mates, and we're going to talk shop, and whatever my interests are,
Yeah.
they'll be very happy to talk about it from my generation. There's some beauty around that, and I think it's a compassionate thing
Mm,
that will be sort of technological, humanistic thing coming together.
Yeah, the advances in humanoid robots and giving them not just sentience in terms of um, the 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 visual ability to think, I guess is what I'm trying to say. A lot of researchers are trying to make robots emotional because that is the resonance that you feel. You need to feel like the technology you're interacting with is emotionally responsive. I did see a news article just the other day that someone has proposed marriage to their AI tool. That things have no boundary.
No, no.
But I mean, are we surprised, right? So we right now our society has a great degree of isolation and loneliness. People are seeking connection. It's not at all surprising to me that people seek connection through technology. And to the degree that it can meet those needs, like who are we to judge negatively? And the same thing was happening when social media happened. Everyone said, "Oh, those young kids, they're all just they spend all day on their phones. They're chatting with each other. They're like, can't they just get face to face and like the good old days?" And to a degree, yes, like face to face interaction is so valuable, but kids these days have grown up with a different ecosystem where digital connection is a thing. And if it satisfies their needs, if it satisfies their needs is the big if there. But if it does, then who are we to judge that a group WhatsApp chat isn't as redeeming as sitting in a cafe with your mates?
And it poses a big question one day, where it comes, because obviously we continually, as psychologists, social psychologists, clinical psychologists, we look at the community, the family, particularly, obviously, school, close social networks, extended family, as being so important. And when you can potentially go out and have a AI, forget about the whole sentient. All it needs to do is just be, because that's theoretical, but it just needs to have intelligence,
Yep.
understand context and nuance,
Yep.
that can then provide a human experience that pride is being expressed to a young person or anybody. Gratitude is being expressed appropriately, and compassion, is
Sure.
a connection, that moral elevation, identity, all these things that if a AI intelligent enough can go out and say, for this particular boy or girl, adult, man or woman, person in hospital, whoever, someone with dementia in hopefully now in the family home rather than putting them in, right? There's going to be some beautiful things tapping into the research that you're looking at, because this is about the nuance of delivery.
Yep. Exactly.
Not just is that function occurring. And then there's a beautiful thing that will extend from this that I'm sure you'll be looking at throughout the years with great detail about how do we look at the data of delivery, how much is valuable for the upbringing or at any stage of life, how to support people.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, technology, it is the frontier, right? So all of our research and our interests really will be drawn to what is happening at the forefront and how can we make that better, right? AI is here to stay. So how do we then take our decades of understanding of psychological processes and otherwise and apply that to make it better, to make the experiences better, to harness that for good is going to be, like you said, it's the next era.
Lisa, do you have another sort of month under the belt that we can just continue this conversation if you just clear everything for the next 30 days?
Unfortunately, I do have a few commitments.
Where can people find out more? Listeners are hearing this conversation. They might want to, read a bit further, hear a bit more, continue the conversation with others. Where could you point them in terms of whether it's research, books, websites, any starters?
Yeah. So my research is hosted. I have a website. Of
Great.
course, everyone has a website. It's lisawilliamsphd.com. So that hosts my research papers, links to them if folks want to check out what's there. I'm always open to requests to chat. I'm on LinkedIn. I used to be on all the social platforms, but LinkedIn's probably the best way to find me now. But beyond my own kind of work, there are some really fascinating popular press books on topics like this. So the researcher who I did my PhD with, who I mentioned several times today, Dave DeSteno, has several books, Out of Character, as one of them, talking about this type of work. So if you're fascinated by work on pride and gratitude and so forth, that those are really nice topics. Jessica Tracy has a book on her pride research. If you want to have a glimpse at her arguments, I think her book is called Take Pride. So that's another some nice pop-ins on emotions specifically. I am a podcast aficionado. Hidden Brain is an excellent podcast that covers a range of topics, but including a lot of social psych work. A lot of the emotion researchers that I collaborate with and see at conferences are often on that podcast. So Hidden Brain is an excellent one, and Invisibilia. I'm not sure if they're still recording, but that's another one to check out if your listeners want to add to their subscriber lists. My time to listen to podcasts has dwindled with young children in the house, but I look forward to the day when I can pick up listening to podcasts again.
What
And
we
so,
might do, Lisa,
yeah,
is after this recording, if you can just send me all of those links, including
sure.
the website as well, we'll put on our show notes, which will be
Yeah,
on neshnikolic.com.
great.
And that way our listeners can find you there and click through. Yeah, make sure we get on our list if you can, because I'm struggling to write all of those.
Yeah, no worries. There's so much out there. Great ways to consume the type of research that sits in the field in which I work. So I'll give you some links for sure.
Before I let you go, final notes. What's the frontier of
What?
research that you're hoping to go towards now?
Yeah, look, I think one maybe idea that I'll leave you and your listeners off with is lots of us understand or resonate with the idea of biodiversity. An ecosystem is good to the degree that it has a variety of things in it, right? An ecosystem with only one animal is not an ecosystem. We need plants and animals and all sorts of both. Our emotional system is the same way. So we thrive when we experience a range of different emotions in different contexts. And what my research is trying to do is to shine light on some of the ones that sit at the positive end of that, things like pride and gratitude. And the more diversity we have in our emotional experience, the better for us, just like the more diversity in an ecosystem, biodiversity, the better for it. So I think thinking about that and how in our everyday lives it's so easy to kind of get into autopilot and not recognize our opportunities to experience these unique, fascinating emotions, to sit with that and think about how can we lean into opportunities to experience pride or gratitude or compassion, and where will those experiences lead us, is probably a net benefit.
What a beautiful message. I think the joy of life comes from that diversity.
Mm,
It's probably where I'm constantly searching for adventure,
mm,
which is
mm.
such a childlike experience. Children love adventure, and maybe that's just one of many variations that are sometimes forgotten. So what a beautiful message to finish up on. So yeah, thank you for that. I'll be taking that little gem away as well. So Lisa, thank you so much for your time, for your incredible insights, the work that you do. It's wonderful to have people like yourself, representing research and sharing it as well, because I think the application is as
Mm.
important as the actual research, so we can understand why we're doing something and try and be nuanced about how we do that in the real life. So yeah, appreciate everything you do, and yeah, wish you all the best as well.
My absolute pleasure. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.